Welcome to the Company of Dads podcast, where we explore the sweet, silly, strange, and sublime aspects of being a lead dad in a world where men, who are the go-to parent, aren't always accepted at work, among their friends, or in their community for what they're doing. I'm your host, Paul Sullivan. Our podcast is just one of the many things we produce each week at the Company of Dads. We have various features, including the Lead Dad of the Week. We have our monthly meetups. We have a new resource library for all fathers. The one-stop shop for all of this is our newsletter, The Dad. So sign up today at thecompanyofdads.com/thedad. Today, our guest is Abby Davisson. She's the founder of the Money and Love Institute and the author of Money and Love, an intelligent roadmap for life's biggest decisions. She's created a course of the same name with her co-author, Stanford Business School professor Myra Strober. Before writing the book and starting the Institute, Abby worked for a decade at The Gap on their social impact mission, where she also created the company's first parent resource group. Abby is married with 2 children and lives in San Francisco. Abby, welcome to the Company of Dads podcast.
Thanks, Paul. I'm so happy to be here.
Are you really a Jenga player?
I am.
Really?
I am not good at it. My sons kick my butt every time, but it's a great rainy day activity.
When I saw that on your website, I thought she's got to be kidding, because every parent, parenting, so much of parenting and organizing life and work is a game of Jenga. It's a game of like, can I move these things around? Can I pull this one peg out and not have everything? Has your, I don't want to say, your above average ability, except when you're playing against your sons at Jenga, has that helped in parenting? Has that framed the way you parent?
Well, I love that phrase. I hate the phrase work-life balance, work-life integration. Like that phrase, work-life Jenga, I did not make it up. It's Stacey Abrams invented that phrase. And when I heard it, I was like, absolutely, that is 100% what this game is. It's like, how can I not make this tower of impossibly stacked obligations fall over? And so the visual just made 100% sense to me, which is why I put it on my website. And hopefully I'm better at work-life Jenga than I am at real-life Jenga.
Well, you're playing against kids, and kids cheat. So, nobody in life cheats.
Totally.
Do you also play Tetris?
Yes, that was a big procrastination technique in college, actually, when we still played
good parenting tool is Tetris. Everything's falling down on you, and you're like,
yes,
how do I stack it
these
up?
are all good analogies for life. It's true.
You took the course at Stanford on this subject, taught by Myra Strober, your co-author, your course creator. What, did the MBA version of Abby think of that course versus the married, working mom and entrepreneur version of Abby today when you look back on that course?
Well, it's funny. So I got my MBA at Stanford and I did the joint degree with the education school at the same time, which was also an exercise in trying to make all sorts of requirements stack up against each other so that I could graduate in 2 years, because I was already paying so much to get those degrees. I couldn't spend any more time there. And this course was a course that fulfilled both degree requirements. It was actually called Work and Family. And I'll tell you a funny story, because I think your listeners will appreciate this. So when my co-author first created the course, it was called Women and Work. So she's a labor economist, and she had a PhD from MIT and was placed on the lecturer track at the first university where she was teaching. And her fellow MIT PhD grads, who were both men, were placed on the tenure track. And when she realized this, she realized, this is bias. There are things that women are facing in the workforce that we should be talking about. And there was no economic research at that point. So she created this class called Women and Work, started teaching it. Over time, when she switched to teaching it at Stanford, more and more men took the class. And there was one intrepid man who said, you should really change the title of this class, because it's relevant to men too, where we face obligations outside of work that we're trying to fulfill and also trying to excel in our careers. If you change the name to Work and Family, I will personally recruit more men for the course. And so she did, and he did. And when I took it, by the time I took it, which was 2008, it was 40% men. And so not only did it satisfy my degree requirement, I started dating someone in business school and things were getting serious. We were needing to make decisions like, do we accept jobs in the same city? Do we live together? And this course was a very practical one because we took it together. And I thought, great, like all these tough conversations we have to have, let's at least get some class credit for having them. And so that was another part of the motivation.
And is that person now your husband today?
Wouldn't it be so awkward if it was not? Yes,
It'd be
that person is
either
now,
way, it's wonderful.
That person is now my husband. We will celebrate 15 years of marriage in the fall. As you mentioned, we have 2 kids, and we've been putting the lessons of the course to work in our lives ever since we took it. And it was one of the reasons that I wanted to collaborate with my professor turned co-author, because it totally changed our lives and helped us have careers and a family life that are very different than the ones we might have had if we hadn't had access to this information at the perfect point in our relationship.
Lots of follow-on questions, but key one: who got the better grade in the course?
We got the same grade because we worked on our final paper together. And so our final paper was actually the blueprint for our marriage, down to how are we going to combine bank accounts? How are we going? Whose family will we spend holidays with? And so we literally wrote the playbook for how we wanted to combine our lives together in the class.
Then who's been the better student subsequently? Who's followed that playbook more closely, you or your husband?
Well, I wrote the book with the professor, so I think I get some credit for that.
We'll leave it there. But talk about, going into that course, jokes aside, and you end up taking it with your now husband. It could have gone one way or the other. But you go in there, and besides dual credit, besides something that was intriguing, did you go in there thinking, okay, I hope to get this out of that course? And did you leave with, something a lot different or a lot more robust? And tell me the before and after of you going into that course.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And the course was all about how to make big decisions when work and family are concerned. And these are the types of questions, Paul, that I don't know about you, but like no one told me how to make them. I didn't get a class, in high school, or I didn't get my parents sitting me down and saying, here's how to think about those big decisions and think about money and love holistically. It was always, the conventional wisdom was separate career decisions, financial decisions, make those with your head, really analyze them. And then when it comes to relationship decisions, go with your heart and, follow what your gut is telling you, because thinking about money in the context of a relationship is materialistic. You shouldn't do that. And so the before is, I had actually lived with someone before business school, before I met my now husband, and we had none of the conversations that you are supposed to have when you combine your life with someone. Yeah. And it really went sideways. And so what I would hope to get out of the course is some other way to approach these decisions, because what I had done in the past didn't work for me. And so the light bulb moment for me was my professor saying, these decisions all have a component of money and a component of love to them, and to separate them and to make them only in a siloed way does a complete disservice to your ability to see the whole picture, and therefore your ability to make a decision that will serve you well in the long run. And that really changed the game for me. And it really encouraged me to have the types of conversations with my now husband that I was very afraid of doing before, that didn't feel okay to have. And that has served as the foundation for now this very fulfilling and meaningful life we've built together.
Yeah. And just, with your co-author, with Myra Strober, she's very open. She's been divorced at least twice. Is that correct, or more?
Only once. Yeah. Only once. She remarried. She married a second time.
Okay,
yes.
She refers to him as her second husband, so I didn't know what that meant. I didn't know if there was a third one in the wings or something like that. But when you think
not yet, but who knows? Her second one, both of her husbands unfortunately have passed away, so there might be a third.
So all right, so okay. But my question was that these for her were probably a different generation, hard-won decisions. When you think of benefiting both from her research as a labor economist, but also her life experience, maybe for people listening, what are one or two or three things that come to mind that you wouldn't intuitively think about, but are crucial to making those, money and love decisions, whoever your partner may be?
Yeah, well, the first is what I mentioned, is just make them holistically. Don't silo them. And even if you have a career decision to make, you need to think about the impact on the relationships in your life, especially the people who are most invested and impacted in those decisions. So that's the first one. The second one is to slow down. So most of us are very uncomfortable when we are under stress, right? And so we try to just get to the other side of a decision as quickly as possible. And for many of us, that means just like make the decision just to be done with it. And then, we'll deal with the consequences later. But there are a whole host of reasons why making big, hard decisions quickly is not a good idea. And so the third thing, and this wasn't a part of the course, but we developed it together as part of our research for the book, is to use a framework, to use an approach that helps you slow down, makes sure that you are turning over the right rocks so that you can be sure that even if the decision goes sideways in the end, because we can't control the outcome, right? We don't have a crystal ball, but what we can control is our approach and our process, and feel confident that we did the best we could given the information that we had at the time.
Yeah. And I can hear the listener say, okay, this sounds great in theory, but, how does it work in practice? Like, she's got 2 kids, her husband works, she works. How do you find, time for this? How do you carve time out? So talk about how that framework gets used in practice. Like, give it an example of a way that a couple could, not so quickly, but relatively painlessly put this framework into practice to make a difficult decision.
Yeah, so I'll just touch on the framework briefly so people know what it is. So we call ours the 5 C's, because who doesn't love alliteration? So the first C is to clarify what's most important to you. The second is to communicate with the person or people most impacted by the decision. If you're married, it's your partner. The third C is to consider a broad range of choices. The fourth is to check in with trusted resources. And the fifth is to explore likely consequences across different time horizons. And so it sounds very linear, very like, okay, you just do. But in practice, as you mentioned, it's very iterative. But there are some things to know that can set you up for success. So the first C is really about going deep into yourself to figure out what you care about. And it sounds relatively straightforward, right? But we are so affected by what we see our peers and friends doing, what are, the voices in our head that we hear, like our parents expected certain things of us, maybe our bosses, our mentors, right? It's just like getting quiet so you can figure out what you care about. Yeah. But then very quickly after that, it's having those conversations with your partner. And it's not just about talking. I think communicate, we think about like us saying words that the other person hears, is very much about where and when and how you communicate in addition to what you say. So in practice, my husband and I have found through a lot of trial and error that what works best for us is to have these types of conversations out of our house. So outside of like the chaos and the piles of laundry and the dishes in the sink. We go hiking a lot, living in Northern California. That's one of the reasons we pay the exorbitant prices we do to live here. So we go, and especially, during the time I was researching this book, it was COVID, right? We signed our contract in fall 2020. So there were not a lot of things to do except for be outside. We would go on our hike. Our kids would run up ahead of us, and we could have conversations where we were not facing each other, because sometimes it's like too vulnerable, even for somebody you're married to look deeply into the other person's eyes and tell them what you care most about in the world. We could walk side by side, being in an expansive setting, which actually helped us think more expansively and have conversations that the other person was ready to hear, because we weren't springing it on them when we were trying to get the kids out the door in the morning, or brushing our teeth, about to go to bed, being like, I really want to talk to you about how I want to leave my job. And you're like, wait a minute, we're supposed to just like fall asleep right now after this. So, I
just bought a new Tesla. You can't leave your job.
Exactly.
I didn't tell you that either.
So the terms of communication are so important. And I think so often we think about what to say, but it's like, I've learned so much about the other conditions that need to be there to have those conversations in a way that the other person can be fully engaged and receptive to them.
After Stanford and the course and before writing the book, you go off and you work at The Gap, and you're helping them on sustainability, but you also help them create the parent employee resource group. Talk to me about, what lessons you drew from that course or other courses, but specifically the courses I'm talking about your book. What lesson you drew from that course that you were able to apply to your work at the Gap, either with the employee resource group or just, more generally? How did it inform? Did it inform decisions that you were making there? Did it inform, conversation? Yeah, tell me.
Yeah, absolutely. And part of the reason that I started the group was I saw how valuable the course was. So again, it goes back to this course. So my husband and I didn't mention this. We came back every year as guest speakers in the course. And so the course had a lot of guest speakers.
You totally got an A on your final paper, didn't you? You totally got it. You didn't get a C minus. I know you didn't.
No, we didn't. We didn't. I don't even think we took it for a grade, to be honest. I think it was one of the classes where we were like, you could, in Stanford, they let you take classes for just pass fail. But we did go back. We had a really great relationship with our professor. So she invited us back every year, and we would, drive down to Palo Alto, this 45-minute drive. And that would be a point to check in with each other about, like, how is this going? We had like little kids. You don't have a lot of time. We weren't taking long hikes in those days, right? We were like wedded to the nap schedules. We were like just getting by. But I saw how useful this content and this foundation that we had built in this course was for us as we, continued coming back year to year. And I saw how many people, Gap is a very family-friendly company. So there were lots of people who had families, who were thinking about having kids. And I just saw the difference between our approach, having gotten to take this class together at the time we did, and a lot of my colleagues who, were really struggling to have the types of conversations that could be helpful to them to figure out how to both be in careers, if they were married, how to kind of divide the housework equitably so they could both be present employees. And so I actually went to HR and I said, I'd love to explore taking a version of this class to this corporate context, because I think it could help so many people here. And I'll never forget this. I remember sitting in this meeting with my the HR team, who I worked with a lot as part of my day job. So I knew them well. And they said, Abby, it sounds like that course would be amazing. The problem is we don't even know how to help you find the people in this company who are parents. And I said, what do you mean? Like, we have all this data on our customers. Like, you better believe that Old Navy knows which of their customers are parents and what ages their kids are, and like when they're going to outgrow their flip-flops and everything.
People who go to Baby Gap, maybe their parents.
Yeah, right. And so, but they said, well, we don't have that data on our employees. And in fact, unless you're on our health insurance and you have dependents who are also enrolled on that health insurance, we can't tell you who has children. And that blew my mind. And so that was I saw this need to even identify the people who could benefit from a class geared towards people who were dual career couples or just wanted to have some priorities outside of work. And that was what led to the founding of the course, or to the founding of the employee resource group. And I'm so glad that they raised my attention to that, because, and it's not just an issue in Gap, by the way. This is an issue. I was part of a group with lots of leaders of employee resource groups in many other companies. And it's a real issue that a lot of companies struggle with in terms of identifying folks who self-identify as parents in their employee base.
And how did you go about finding the parents? Did you simply just send out a questionnaire and ask, or how did you find out the people who would become the foundation for this employee resource group?
Yeah, well, there were already 5, I believe, employee resource groups at the company at the time. So there was one for employees identifying as Black, employees identifying as Asian, et cetera. And so we went through the same channels. When they would communicate to the whole employee base, we said, if you identify as a parent or caregiver, or even are, and what was so interesting is there were a lot of people who actually weren't currently parents or caregivers, but were thinking about becoming them. And so they would, of course, were welcome to join. And it ended up being, the fastest growing group, because there were so many working parents at the time. There was just not a intentional community for them. And so we stood this up in 2019, which, thank goodness for our foresight, because it turns out in 2020, when, those parents and caregivers were really struggling as daycares and schools closed, we had a forum for them to stay connected and for the company to actually listen to their needs.
And then the softball question of all softball questions, I'd imagine that the framework, if it was, I don't know what stage of being developed, was probably very helpful to parents during gap parents during the pandemic, because it would give them, 5 things to sort of bear in mind to sort of work through these decisions that had to be made in an extreme situation. Did it work that
It
way in
would have
practice?
been so helpful had it existed, but as I mentioned, we
Didn't come
just
out after,
started
yeah.
working on the book in the fall of
I
2020.
know I
So
didn't
we
know if the
didn't.
5 C's came from the course, but okay, they came later.
No, they were not a part of the course. So we developed them as part of the research and as part of the writing of the manuscript. So they weren't there at the time, but obviously a lot of the data and a lot of these ideas were part of the course that we just crystallized into the framework. It was very helpful to have the community and to have to know that they felt seen. I mean, I think that was the biggest thing, and I imagine that's something you see in your work, is that so much of the time, and I think COVID really shone a spotlight on how many obligations outside of work we are individuals have, right? As people were seeing kids
Also,
on the
but it
Zoom
also
screens
showed
and
like the strain of making decisions, because now you're not
totally.
before, even if you're trying to make a decision as a family or as husband and wife or as partners, you had a space for work, you had a space for home, you had a liminal space in between where you were commuting, chances are, and then suddenly it was all at once, and there was no place, there was no break. There are moments when I was afraid to open that door because I didn't know what was on the other side of that door. It was my family, but there was still
You didn't know what state they would be in.
you don't
Yes.
know what state somebody's in. The Zoom school, you
Yeah.
can only do it for so long. Um, Gap is an amazing company. You've got 2 boys. They're growing. Gap makes a lot of different clothes for kids. Most people would say, Abby, this is going great. You got the great job at Gap, sustainability, your employee resource group. What was the point where you said, you know what? I've signed the contract for this book. I'm not just going to write the book in my spare time. I'm going to leave Gap. I'm going to go out on my own. I'm going to start the Money and Love Institute, because why? Like, what was the moment when you said, I've got to do this because this is the time where I have to pivot in my career and go all in on this idea that I have?
Well, I did write the book in my spare time while I was working at Gap, leading the foundation there, and my kids were in Zoom school. So it wasn't when I got the contract, because I frankly, my team needed me at work, and I wasn't ready to take that leap. But what I did is, and I'm totally my guinea pig, I applied this framework to my own life multiple times. So you asked kind of what's an example. So first was my husband and I decided we were looking, because in COVID, everyone, no matter how big your space was that we were living in, needed more space. So we first attempted to look for places to move to the suburbs. We actually thought that we went very far down the path, like even potentially making an offer on a house, because what we had clarified was that we needed more space and we needed schools that were open, because San Francisco was the largest urban school district that was remote for the longest. So it wasn't until actually over a year after the pandemic that they went back to in-person school. So there were a lot of time. I had Zoom kindergarten and Zoom second grade. So just to set the stage, like, this was not like self-directed kids who were sitting themselves down and turning on their Zoom screens themselves. But to illustrate the framework, so we went down the path. We decided, okay, let's find more space. And as we worked through the C's, we realized, we did the math. I mean, we're 2 MBAs, right? We know our way around a spreadsheet, and we realized, wow, to get more space, because housing prices were at such a premium, especially in the suburbs at that time, we would be really tethered to these corporate jobs. And both of us, actually, in order to get into business school, had said, in the long term, we want to start our own ventures. We had an entrepreneurial aspiration for our long-term careers. And at that point, we were coming up on 15 years out of business school. And we said, like, at what point is it long-term? And we felt like actually we needed to re-clarify that more than extra space, we needed some career flexibility. And so the first decision was actually not to move. It helped that there was a research paper I had found as part of the research for the book that talked about the effect of density, so square footage per person, on family harmony. And it said, actually, it doesn't matter. There's a point at which, yes, it's helpful to have like more than one bathroom if you're sharing with, for your family. However, then there's a point of diminishing returns. And actually, if you have too big of a space, that children, especially boys, which I have 2 boys, can feel disconnected and lonely. And it's much more important to have a perception of the space that it is fit for purpose and meets your needs, as opposed to always feeling like the space is too small. So that actually totally changed our view of, also it helped that the kids actually did go back to in-person school at some point. But we decided not to move. Like we clarified that we had entrepreneurial aspirations, but I was still working on the book in my nights and weekends and occasional days off, while my husband was really picking up a lot of the parenting slack that I wasn't picking up myself during that time. But there came a point where I had finished the manuscript, it was turned in, and I was starting to think about what's next. And I had done a lot of soul searching as I was writing the book and through different experiments. We haven't talked about like the consequences, but there's a way to prototype different elements of the decision. And I knew that I was being pulled toward this book more than I was being pulled by my job. At that point, I was on my fourth manager in 14 months. The role had changed, the company had changed, I had changed, the world had changed. And it felt like I needed to let go of that trapeze in order to catch the next one and to take this information to more people that could benefit. So I gave notice 2 years ago, I left, and then I was able to throw myself into the book promotion, which I know you know a thing or two about how all-encompassing that can be, and then start the Money and Love Institute after that. But I did them both for a period of time, and it did make me realize I could not do them both perpetually.
No, okay. The framework, you're giving great examples and some personal examples of how it worked. But of course, there's some decisions where you can't come to an agreement. Somebody desperately wants to live in California and the other person desperately wants to live in New York. I don't know. Somebody wants to take a big job that will require that person to travel all the time. And the other person doesn't want to be, stuck being the go-to parent or sacrifice a career that they have. How does the framework, operate when you have something where it's, where you're at an impasse, where you're talking through this, you're using the 5 C's, but you're at an impasse? What do you then? How do you help people get past that?
Well, someone has asked me, like, should there be a 6th C about compromise? Because that's what you're talking about. It's like, how do you
that's better. That's better than like crying or cowardly slinking away. Also begin with C. So I like compromise. That's a better C. But yeah.
It's true. Well, I think the compromise comes in the communication step. And so, it's really about or choices, right? Choices about expanding your consideration set to not just see the binary, like, do you get your way or do I get my way, right? So part of one of the visuals that I love, that I use a lot in my own relationship, is it's not me against you. It's not like, either you win, I lose, or the other way around. It's like us together, united against the problem. So if the problem is, where do we live? And I, really want to live in California and you want to live in New York. It's not like, well, does California win or New York win? It's like, okay, we're having a challenge coming to agreement about where to live. Let's together think about what that could look like. And so maybe that means we agree on a period of time, like 5 years. This actually happened to a college roommate of mine. She is from Texas. They lived in DC together in graduate school. Her husband is from Hawaii, and he always thought that he would move to Hawaii and raise his family there. And so she said, I'm not ready to go to Hawaii. Can you give me 5 years to really, build my career in the continental US? And after 5 years, let's agree to revisit it. But like, if I feel rushed into the decision to move right now, it's not going to go well. And he said, okay, like, just know that this is important to me. Let's come back to it in 5 years. And at that point, she felt comfortable enough in her career to make the case to her employer to work remotely. They moved to Hawaii and they're raising their 2 boys there today. So it's about finding the solution that actually allows you both to feel like you can live with the decision. But that might look like a longer time horizon for the solution to unfold.
Does the framework ever fail?
I mean, the framework is a framework, so it's designed to be sturdy and flexible. I think what people sometimes think of it failing is, well, I used it and this decision didn't work out. Like, the outcome was not what I had hoped. But that is life, right? It's not that the framework is a crystal ball. It's not that there are never monkey wrenches. And that's sort of attaching the quality of the approach to the outcome is something that Annie Duke calls resulting, right? So the framework is not a guarantee.
This is Annie Duke, the professional poker player, correct? Is that what we're talking about?
Yes.
Famous poker. Okay.
Decision-making expert, et cetera. Yes. So she says, you cannot say this was a bad decision because the decision turned out in a way I don't like. You actually have to separate the process you used from the outcome. And even if the outcome doesn't turn out the way you wanted, if you feel good about your process, then that's all you can hope for. And so the framework is the process. It's not a guarantee that the outcome is going to be perfect and, the dream scenario. So that's something to clarify. Some people say, I used this and my decision really didn't work out. And it's like, well, okay, but did you feel good about it when you made it? Well, yeah, but then, okay, so that's all you can do. And my co-author has this phrase that I love, which is angels can't do better, right? It's like you didn't have all the information. In fact, we always are making decisions with imperfect information. So you have to give yourself grace that you didn't see that, outcome coming at the time. But as somebody who thinks a lot about decisions I made and second guesses themselves, I will tell you, Paul, that this career leap that I made from a job that was once my dream job to now a very uncertain path as an entrepreneur, I feel much more confident about that decision because I used this approach, despite not knowing how it's all going to work out in the end.
That's good. I keep coming back to your friend moving to Hawaii. I'm like, that poor guy, if he couldn't sell a move from Washington, D.C. to Hawaii, I mean, that guy's not in sales. I mean, it's like, ever been to DC
well, he's an
August?
attorney. He's not in
DC
sales.
in August is awful. It's like an attorney even better. Like, it's Hawaii, man.
Totally. And now she's sold. I mean, they're not moving.
Oh, I would be too. That'd be an easy one. Abby Davisson, author of Money and Love, an intelligent roadmap for life's biggest decisions. This has been wonderful. Before I let you go, though, tell me what, people can go buy the book. They can read the book. They can learn. But what does the Money and Love Institute do? Does it work with companies? Does it work with individuals? Tell me about what the Money and Love Institute does on a daily basis.
Yeah, so we help people make better decisions that lead to more happiness, prosperity, and purpose. And so that looks like for individuals, we have certain offerings like a cohort-based course that I'm teaching. We also have a course that you mentioned that can be accessed via phone. So both of those, you can find out more at moneylovebook.com. But also, we've been doing some work with financial advisors because they help their clients make a lot of big life decisions from a financial perspective, but there are always love issues underneath those. So we're really training advisors and other experts who work with clients to give them some frameworks and tools to help their clients make better decisions. So we're really just trying to help people make better decisions in whatever way they can.
Abby Davisson, thank you again for joining me on the Company of Dads podcast. I appreciate it.
Thanks so much, Paul. It was great to be here.
Thank you for listening to the Company of Dads podcast. I also want to thank the people who make this podcast and everything else that we do at the Company of Dads possible. Helder Mira, who is our audio producer. Lindsay Decker, who handles all of our social media. Terry Brennan, who's helping us with the newsletter and audience acquisition. Emily Servin, who is our web maestro. And of course, Evan Roosevelt, who is working side by side with me in many of the things that we do here at the Company of Dads. It's a great team, and we're just trying to bring you the best in fatherhood. Remember, the one-stop shop for everything is our newsletter, The Dad. Sign up at thecompanyofdads.com/thedad. Thank you again for listening.